Hi, I'm Jackie Toops with ArmyWife101.com, and today I've got a very special guest who I find incredibly open, honest, admirable, and strong. Today I have with me Army wife Heather Turner, and her story has actually been translated into film. It is currently on the silver screen, and it's a movie called Indivisible. You may have heard of it. So today we're going to talk to Heather and get her real life story from behind the scenes. But before I do, I'll give you kind of a quick introduction here. So Heather and her husband, Army Chaplain Darren Turner, have inspired the film Indivisible. Like I said, it's in theaters now. And basically, it's a story of how Darren went to Iraq in 2007, ready to serve as a chaplain. Both of you and the couple have had a really wonderful history of service, which I find highly admirable. So he went in very gung-ho, ready to change lives, and after a very, very long and traumatic 15-month deployment, when he returned home, things were very different, very challenging for the couple, which many military families face. But theirs got to the point where it got so difficult and challenging that they contemplated divorce. And that's a big decision for any military family, but especially the family of a chaplain, I'm sure, as you could imagine. So what they did is they managed to find a way back together. They managed to communicate. They managed to find common beliefs and bonds. And their story is a story of faith, and it's a story of hope. And I'm very happy to have you with me today because I can't wait to hear this in your own words. So thank you for being here, Heather.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Great, thank you. I know that was a long introduction, but there's just so much to tell about your history, about the film itself. And I know it stars cast members from Grey's Anatomy, which is really exciting. So just the fact that your life is now on film, I mean, that must be incredibly surreal.
Definitely. And my kids make fun of us that we use that word surreal in every interview that we've had, but there's really no better word. It's very strange and a little bit awkward, but if it encourages other military families or any family really, then we're glad for it to be uncomfortable.
Wonderful. Well, thank you today just in advance for sharing your story, because when I was reading about it, I thought so many families go through this and they go through it alone. They don't tell anyone. I mean, of course, they tell immediate family who might be affected. But the fact that you shared your story openly and said, hey, you're not alone. It happens. It can happen to anybody. And it can also be overcome. I think that's really inspiring. So that's what we'll ultimately focus on today. But before we get to that point, I absolutely have some questions because I find this so fascinating. So there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes, definitely.
Good. Well, before to get it started, can you tell me a little bit about what your marriage was like with Darren before he joined the Army?
Yeah, we had no military experience. His dad had served in the National Guard before he was born, and so we really didn't know anyone who had served. We were happily married, had all of our children before we came into the military. We worked at the University of Georgia in campus ministry, and things were going well. We just knew that that wouldn't be our long-term best fit. And so we really just spent a lot of time seeking out, older folks who'd gone before us and just different fields. And I'd had a friend who married an Army chaplain. And so we met up with them for a weekend, and they kind of gave us their insight of what it was like. And we fell in love. And so, our marriage was a happy marriage, but we definitely had, the roller coaster of seasons of just exhaustion and raising small children. But all in all, I think we would say that we felt, we were excited about that next stage of life.
Absolutely. Well, and I feel like a lot of military families go into this, and I've heard repeatedly people say, oh, well, you knew what you were getting into. No, nobody knows.
No.
Like you, we were already married, we already had children, and then he joined, and it was like, whoa, pump the brakes.
Exactly. And we didn't have things like blogs or podcasts about what it's like to be in the military back then. So yeah, it's definitely helpful to have some outlets to do research before you go in.
I agree. Well, I'm glad that we have ArmyWife101.com to hopefully help. And that's one of the things we strive to do. And I'm hoping that your story today is going to save somebody. It may save their marriage. It may be exactly what they need to hear. So thank you again for sharing your time with us.
Sure.
So for many of the new spouses, especially you, where you've already got your established family, at first it feels like it's his job. It's your spouse's job. Like, yeah, he joined the army. And you feel like it's not yours. But then there's kind of that moment where you get swept up in the lifestyle and it hits home and you're like, oh, wow, this is my life. I'm moving, or we're dealing with deployment, or I'm raising kids alone. For you, did you have that moment? And what was it where it clicked that, oh, I'm in this too?
For us, that happened before we even went in. We had to, as a chaplain, you have to have a graduate degree, and at the time we only had a bachelor's. So we were living in Atlanta, and we owned our own home, and so to be able to become a chaplain, he had to go to graduate school full time. And so we sold our house, sold pretty much everything we owned, moved to this teeny tiny little family apartments for campus students. And so at that point, I thought, okay, we're all in.
Absolutely.
I felt it.
Impressive. Like, what, I didn't even realize the next level of service you had to go to just to get in as a chaplain.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. You have to have, I'm not sure what it is now, but I think 5 years of ministry, practical ministry experience, and a master's degree in divinity.
Wow. So this goes to show just how committed you and your husband both were to this, which I think is just incredible. It's truly a gift of love, I would say. So when your husband deployed, it was back when we did very long deployments. I've only dealt with a 4-month and a 6-month, but you did 15 months with 3 children. Can you tell me what helped you hold down the home front? Did you have some good support while he was away?
Yeah, definitely our family and friends. We didn't live but a few hours away from family. So that was nice. We had grandparent visits and we could go home for extended stays. But really what made it kind of a sweet time actually for me was I had really kind of accidentally volunteered to be an FRG leader. I volunteered, but I didn't really know what I was volunteering for. And so, but our company commander was not married. He was single. So they were looking for spouses to volunteer. So I did. And during that time, I spent so much time with the ladies, the leadership during that deployment, several times a month. And those friendships really, and just the humor that we all could share in the midst of, what might not be funny to anyone else, we felt like we were allowed to laugh at. So those friendships really were very important to me and became what I really relied on. And then, of course, our faith family, our church family, who, a lot of them were also military. So they got it, they got what we were going through too.
Oh, that's so important to have that. And how old were your children when Darren deployed?
My youngest was 10 months old, my daughter, and my son was 4, and my oldest daughter was 6.
Oh, wow.
So little bitty.
And I know how demanding they are at that age too.
I know. They're so big now.
Oh, I bet. Well, so when your husband was deployed, I know it's very difficult, especially, even in 2007, technology is much better than it used to be. Did you find it still easy to communicate? Were you using email or video chats? How did you two stay in touch?
Our most common way was Skype. He would, back then they would have the call centers and they would go into the little cubies, they would sit in their little cubicle and get so many minutes with you. Phone calls. So, he would call every few days, which was nice. And then we kept it was a blog, but not a public blog. It was just between he and I and our family members so that we could post pictures and kind of, hear about what was going on, which in the end, that blog is what the film producer read to get our story for the movie.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's very weird.
You didn't know that's incredible. See,
yeah.
Reason. That's wonderful.
Yeah. Be careful what you write.
that's true.
Comes back around.
Exactly. So while he was away, and so far away, did you feel like your communication with him was good and strong? Did you still have support, or did you notice that it was becoming challenging?
Relationally, I didn't feel like there was anything out of the ordinary. It was just difficult to communicate because there's a delay. We're trying to coordinate time zones, and I would speak and then there was several second delay, but he would be responding to the last question, and so just not a lot got accomplished in that communication. So emails probably was the best thing, but even still, I didn't really notice a whole lot change in him. It's depicted that way in the movie, but it really wasn't until he got home that I really started to sense, okay, this is off.
Yes. Well, and even when it's not off, I feel like for every military family, it's difficult. And the thing is, the movies typically never paint that picture. They end with, homecoming and kisses and balloons and hugs, and that's the end. But really, that's just the beginning, because you're getting to know each other again. They're getting to know the kids. Things have changed, and here you are with two unshared experiences trying to share a life together again, and it's not easy.
You're right. You're exactly right.
So can you tell me a little bit about what happened when he did come home? What was the dynamic like? What was a red flag that something had changed?
When he came back, we had some stress in our life that was unusual anyway. We were fostering a family member during that time, a child. So there was some added stress in our in our life. And so initially our butting heads was kind of about that, because we were just trying to decide, was this going to be a long-term situation or short-term fostering, and we disagreed about that. But just the smallest things were becoming a big deal for him, and just the desire to control the tiniest things, how the dishwasher was loaded, and then just this incredible sense of and he shares this. I don't want to throw him under the bus, but he would say, he just was extremely critical of anything I did, and I couldn't do anything right. Oh. But he couldn't really tell me why that was going on. And then just an absence. He just preferred to be with his guys than with us. And in his view, I was just turning into this dripping faucet nag, because every time he was around, I was trying to engage with him in conversation. And I think he was just too exhausted and didn't have anything to give in those conversations. And so, I would try to have this serious sit down, and he would say, well, sorry, I just need to go on a run and, and leave. And, so it was just, I was grasping for straws, and he just did not know how to be in the family with us without him feeling suffocated and then kind of lashing out because of that.
Oh gosh. And that's rough, because here you are talking about his needs, how he needed to get away, escape, he needed the buddies. But what about your needs as a wife, as a partner, as, hey, we're raising these children together, please. Yeah, I think the movie I saw, I haven't watched it yet, but I do plan on it. But I saw a very emotional scene in the kitchen where he basically says that he doesn't have to explain himself, or that the guys need him. And your character says, I need you. Is that based on a real experience?
No, that was definitely the heart of the matter. We didn't have that incident in the kitchen. And honestly, the movie makes us look very noble. It looks like he's just fighting for his guys and I'm fighting, when really we had just become so focused on our own needs that it just became really nasty and self-centered. I was really just building up my walls of resentment. We were lobbing, insults. There's a great Sting song, and I can't remember the quote, the lyrics, but, just lobbing insults into each other's camp, was the way we were. We really had just set up two camps against each other, and it just boiled down to who was going to win. We didn't even know what the win was, but it just turned into this very competitive, nasty argument of just, I'm going to be right and I'm going to come out on top. We wouldn't outright say that, but that's how we were acting.
Yeah, well, and I think a lot of military families can relate to that, because when you get so frustrated, so angry, so hurt, it's so much easier to just be angry and defensive and hope that maybe I'll say the right thing, that he'll finally get it and stop doing what he's doing. But when you're both in that kind of volatile, I can see.
Yeah, and then, for me, I think the struggle was trying to manipulate his behavior with my emotions and my, whatever I could say to make him get it or make him feel bad enough to want to do something about it. And, just desperation. It was pitiful desperation.
Understandable, though. I mean,
yeah, definitely.
Back somebody else, and
yes. I now, will counsel couples, and the guy often will say, she's just crazy. Like, that's what desperate looks like, is you get crazy.
Yeah, and that means it's still worth fighting for. She's still in it. It's when she says, "Okay, I'm done." That's when
Right.
Whoops.
Yeah.
So, and I think if this can happen to the family of a chaplain, this can happen to anyone. And I bet people are afraid to talk about it because they think, "Oh, it's only me." And I'm sure your husband has heard stories about couples going through marital issues, and now here he is facing it, and it's different when it's in your own backyard.
Yeah, definitely.
So looking back at that reintegration period, is there something you wish he had done differently and something you wish you had done differently?
I don't know. I think for us, that process had to happen. We had such unrealistic ideas of marriage, or at least I did, that process of getting over being completely disappointed in each other and ourselves had to happen so that we could just get over it, get over ourselves, and get over, I want, to where we could say, you know what, let's just reassess, let's reevaluate what we do want. And so I don't know that I would do anything differently. Obviously, I would not be such a ding dong and so mean. And I'm sure he would say the same thing. We said, terrible things to each other. But in the end, I look back in hindsight, that's exactly the process we had to go through. And, a lot of times in marriage and counseling, they'll call that, it's like a funnel, and you have to sometimes, it's like they call it the 7-year funnel, I think. But, typically there's stages in your marriage and any relationship really that you have to go through these crisis periods and come out the other end if you are growing at all. And I think if you never go through those periods, then I would wonder if you are growing in your relationship. So I don't resent or regret I regret how we handled it, but I do embrace now the process that we went through.
That's good. And it sounds like a very important process. I know it's, even if you're trying to exercise and build muscle, like you have to create that strain, you have to create, in order to grow. So I think that's wonderful that you look at it as a teachable moment versus something you wish had just never happened.
Yeah.
I know you're stronger today.
Yes.
Yeah. So then, can you describe for you, so we know he came back, it was very different and you were fighting all the time. When did you finally say, okay, enough is enough? Because I know that is not easy. And with 3 kids and with your beliefs and your family and society, that must have been massive for you to say, I'm done.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit about what led up to that?
Yeah, it was just a culmination of the continued, I think emotional exhaustion. And, that's not an excuse. And I made that decision to separate from a very dark place in my heart. So a lot of women will come to me and I think are looking for the right, it's like, when is the right time? And I say, for me, there was never really a right time. That was made when I was absolutely hopeless and desperate. And I just grown so self-protective. And I had I began to be ruled by fear of, is this ever going to change? Is this going to be what my children are going to be raised under? Are they going to be ruined because they were just crushed by their parents' relationship? And so it was just all these fears that finally drove me to say, even though this isn't the best thing, I think it's still the better of 2 evils, is how I had rationalized at that point. So when he had to leave for a 3-week trip for some training, and initially I just said, I want this to be the beginning of a separation. And that was still my manipulating. That was still my way of trying to force him to deal with it, because, I wanted him to take me seriously. And so that's what that came out of, was, trying to manipulate the situation. But yeah, so I was at that place and I was willing to do whatever it took, no matter how ugly it got, right or wrong. And so when he left for that 3-week training, he would say he didn't even take me seriously then, that it wasn't until he came back And on the drive home, he was planning to come back home, and I said, no, I don't want you, I don't want you to come here. That he finally said, oh, okay. But even then, it still took, we were separated, I don't know, 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
And it took all of that time for him to take the situation seriously.
Whew.
Yeah.
I can't imagine for you. You're like, come on.
Yeah. But after a couple of months of him just trying to fix it, and I could tell he wasn't tracking, where I was and where our relationship was, I was done. And I had just, I was, this far away from contacting a lawyer. I had found a place to live back at home, opened my own checking account, my own credit cards. And so I had checked out. I was ready to not fight that fight any longer.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. And I know that took a lot on your behalf. And even when you said, hey, separating, I know that was still like, come on, please. Oh, gosh. Well, but the good news is that he did come back around. It might not have been on your timeline that you would have preferred, but he did do it. Can you tell me what helped bring him back around? What caused the change?
Well, it was both of us. And I think we would both say, because we're Christians and our faith had everything to do with the reconciliation, we would both say that it wasn't anything that he did that brought me back around, and it wasn't anything I did that brought him back around. Really, it was my relationship with the Lord and his relationship with the Lord, and that healing taking place that then basically just freed us up to love each other unconditionally. And without fear. And so it was just neat how the timing happened at the same time. So the same time I was going through some things and, really taking inventory of life and inventory of my heart and how I was making decisions and why, did I want to make all the decisions in my life out of fear and mistrust? He was, taking account of some things, and the process was just, divinely orchestrated so that we were both drawn to each other mutually, but not because the other one was performing any better, because that would be dangerous, because then as soon as the other one is being a rear end again, then we're back to where we started. So that was really the change for us, is the beginnings of learning how to love each other regardless of how the other were treating each other. And that was our big takeaway from that. Was getting over that. And we learn it every day. It's still, we still struggle with it, but so that was our reconciliation.
That's incredibly powerful, and I know a lot of our followers will love hearing that. And I just think it's wonderful that it happened at the same time by no accident. And I just think the fact that you decided to take that step again is very admirable. And I'm sure it took time. I'm sure it wasn't like the next day, okay, we're back to newlywed status. I know that's reality. And I think it's important that people are aware that, no, it does still take probably choices and actions every day.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. So what would you say for military families who are going through these same struggles? What would you recommend so they don't get so distanced that it's just easier to walk away? Do you have any sort of advice you would like to share?
Man, I wish I did have better advice. I would say, the circumstances are always going to be hard, whether you're in the military or you have financial issues, or maybe a spouse or a child has health issues. Marriage and life is just tough. And I think my advice would be for anyone, but for me, from a woman's perspective, and as a Christian, I would say really my only hope and advice is you need to know who you are and be grounded in that and whose you are as a Christian, so that when all of these circumstances are swimming around you and this person makes you feel like a failure, or this person, your kids are a wreck and you feel like a failure as a mom, when all of those things are going on and speaking, your identity to you, knowing who you are and preaching that to yourself every day that truth will keep you from that riding that roller coaster of being subject to everyone around you's opinion of yourself and your worth, what you're worth at the moment based on how you're performing. And so, and same for husbands too, to know that, you know, their self-worth cannot be in their job. And my husband, my husband often tells his soldiers, and we're in special operations now and have been for quite some time, where these guys are really good at what they do, but he will sit them down when they're in a crisis and say, you know what, you're neglecting your family. You cannot, no one can take your place in your family, but in your job, you're very easily replaced. And don't think too highly of yourself. And so for the guys, he would say, don't take yourself too seriously, because you can easily be replaced, but your family, that can't happen with your family. You are those kids' only dad. That's your, for the moment, that's your spouse, your only spouse. So yeah, I would say to the woman, know who you are. And for the guy, don't take yourself too seriously.
Wonderful. I love that you threw in advice for the men too.
Yeah.
Bonus.
Yeah.
Some women watching will go back and share that with their husbands.
Yeah, watch this.
Yes.
That's so.
It's not what you do, it's who you are inside. And I think that is very valuable, because things will happen around you and can shake you. They can shake what you believe, and they can shake who you believe you are to your core. So if you're strong with that and you're affirming that, and then I think that's wonderful advice.
Yeah.
I don't know that I've actually heard that. Like, everyone always says, oh, you got to communicate, which is good too.
Yeah, those are all great things. But yeah, but even still, that's not going to, that's on a good day, you'll communicate. But what happens on a bad day? What happens when it all falls apart? And honestly, everyone is this way, but I know my female friends, I think we're just so ruled by our role as a wife and a mom, and performing well and doing well at that, is just such a heavy burden that we live under.
True.
And we just become ruled, or I do at least. I fight every day being ruled by others' opinions of me. And this movie is just even further, testing to say, you know what, this is, I know who I am and whose I am. And at the end of the day, that's all I have to go on. Because if I listened to the voices around me, I wouldn't make it very, very far in the day without having, an emotional breakdown, or just, and I think that's, a lot of what leads to depression is just, you just constantly listen to those messages and never tell yourself the truth.
Wow. I love that. Thank you. That's definitely a message I think everyone needs to hear. So thank you so much for that. What can I ask you? Now you and your husband, you're doing well. How many years have you been married?
18. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 18 years. We're just about to celebrate 19. So
congratulations.
And the kids are 17, 15, and 12.
So many teenagers. And I know even the baby's almost a teen.
I know. It goes fast. Yeah. They always say that, but it does.
Yes. Someone said to me that the days are long, but the years are short. And I thought that was, there are some days where I'm like, when is it bedtime? And then, they're like, what? You've lost teeth, or you're driving?
Yes, I know.
Well, so now that you guys are together, you're on the same page, and he is active duty again, which is amazing, because this is the only film, Indivisible is the only film to date that actually is about an active duty service member. So that's
what I've heard. Yeah. And they did have to go through, obviously, they had to go through all the permissions for the military, and where we work now, they had to get permission. So it is, it's been a very full summer and fall so far.
I can imagine. So it must be just crazy seeing your story portrayed on the silver screen. And do you feel like it's pretty well done? Like, you're comfortable with the way they portrayed your story?
Yeah, absolutely. I love the casting, and I felt like they did a great job. And the actors and actresses, I think, were invested in the film. Obviously, it's not a biography. It's a movie. So the overarching themes are consistent with our story. But Darren doesn't have PTSD, which the movie does portray. A lot of the none of the characters in the movie, other than our family, are are based on true characters. So they are called what we've learned to call them composite characters. So they took stories from different people that were real and kind of squished them into one character. So pieces of stories were represented in different characters. But overall, I think the idea that just it's giving the chaplaincy and the military and military families some exposure to the public civilian world that wouldn't normally see, a different take on military life and deployments and things like that. I think is overall, I feel like I hope it's gonna be an encouragement to people.
Very good. I think that's an excellent contribution. And it wouldn't have happened if you weren't vulnerable and if you weren't brave enough to share your story. So thank you again for doing that, because I'm sure people now probably see that and they think they know you, and they, and you can't just say, oh no, it's been perfect the whole time.
Right.
That's cool to have taken some courage on your part. But have you managed to leverage that? And do you and your husband work together now with families to help strengthen their marriage?
Not much has changed for us. After our separation, he resigned his commission and got out of the military for a year. And we just spent a year counseling or getting counseling and kind of reconnecting. And after a year out of the military, we got an invitation to come back in. So we came back in 2009. And since then, as a chaplain, we do marriage retreats, and we share our story at marriage retreats. But I would say by and large, the chaplain spends most of his time counseling, and most of that is marriage counseling. So we have just invested in the relationships of the guys the families that we are working with the units he's assigned to. And so we've just really, that's not changed. That's what we have been doing, and that's what we'll keep doing. And really the things that have changed have just been like this interviews that obviously wouldn't have done before. But the movie is out, and so a lot of the busyness of that is over for us. And we're just keeping on.
That's wonderful. And I just want to thank you again so much today for sharing your story with us, because I know, like I said, so many military families can relate to it, because it's not an easy lifestyle. And sometimes it is easier to just walk away and stop fighting for it. But sometimes I think there is something to be said for continuing the fight, that there is something special there. And you and Darren are providing a beacon of hope for those who may be losing faith, or just they're living in fear, as you said. So I think your story is truly inspirational. And for those of you who want to go see Indivisible, it is in theaters now. And I just want to thank you again so much. So please, again, it's been a true pleasure. I look forward to watching the film, and I'll think of you throughout. I'll let you know.
Okay, thanks so much. It was good. Nice to talk.
You too. Thanks again, Heather. Bye-bye.
Bye.